What's up, guys? You are watching Fight Feed. Today, I'll be giving you my recap of the UFC Fight Night card that just took place last night in Mexico City, Moreno versus Erceg. So my overall summary of this card is that it was a fantastic card, very high energy in Mexico City, quite a few different hometown heroes for Mexico. And fortunately for the Mexican fighters, this fight card, I think, went a lot better than the Sphere card, where I think we saw a disproportionate amount of Mexican fighters lose at the Sphere, whereas on this card, I think it was a mixed bag of several wins with several losses, but I think it was about 50-50 overall. But we could go through that as we go into the card, reviewing each fight, and I will give you just my notes and summary for each fight. As I was watching, I was taking some notes on not only how the fight was, transpiring, but who I thought won each round. So, without further ado, we'll dive in. Okay, fight number one. We had Hubbard versus Medeiros. If you guys watched my my pick video for this, I actually didn't get this fight as part of my picks, mainly because when I was actually looking and making my pick video or reviewing for my picks, for some reason there was a different fight that was on the card on UFC's website. Some creators, you guys will know if you've done this in the past, that for whatever reason, the UFC sometimes will have, if you look at a fight card, a couple weeks in advance, they'll have a different matchup in place that ends up not happening. And so in this case, when I looked on UFC's website a couple weeks back, it was actually Hubbard versus one of the Bonfim brothers. And as we know, that's not what actually occurred. It's Medeiros. I don't know if that's like a glitch on the UFC's website, but when I looked, that's exactly what it was. And I probably was looking around like March 22nd time frame. So anyways, I didn't get a pick in for this one, but it's Hubbard versus Medeiros. This is actually a pretty entertaining fight to start the card. Nothing that was too crazy in terms of, I feel like neither fighter truly had control, if you will. But I do think that Hubbard honestly shocked me with his ability to land on the feet. Definitely looked a lot stronger than Medeiros in the striking aspects. And kind of just going through my notes of this fight, you know, I gave Hubbard round one and round two solely based off of his ability to, land more on the feet. It looks like his shots were hurting Medeiros more than Medeiros was hurting him. And honestly, I was a little bit shocked when I was watching this because I saw, how the UFC puts up the Twitter stuff, right? And a bunch of people had it 1-1. And I don't know if I was watching a different fight. I can't see how you score round one in favor of Medeiros, given the activity Hubbard had. Not only his activity, he was advancing much more than Medeiros, and I think landing the bigger shots on the feet. So really, I had rounds 1 and 2 going to Hubbard, Medeiros winning round 3, ultimately feeling as though Hubbard should have got the nod. But I think it was one of those fights where it was too close for comfort, and neither fighter truly imposed their will in a way where you could convincingly say, hey, Medeiros won this or Hubbard. I feel like it's a toss-up, and it's one of those fights that ends up being kind of subjected to the viewer of what you think should get the nod in terms of a win. What was interesting is just when you talk about damage, I don't necessarily understand their scoring criteria for damage, because is damage just based on how hard the shot sounds versus what it actually does to the opponent? And this is actually something that we're going to get into with a fight that's later on the card, Vince Pichel versus Rafa Garcia. But overall, I think this was a very interesting fight at the start of the card. Definitely some good activity, and I think both fighters were definitely going for it. Ultimately, Medeiros got the win, and like I said, for me, I had it scored round 1 and 2 to Hubbard just based off of his ability to strike, and also feeling as though he had the more thudding strikes. And that's a shout out to Hubbard because his nickname's Thud. I hope that Hubbard gets another chance. I know the UFC signed him off, but he came off of the veteran season of Ultimate Fighter, and I believe he ultimately lost to Kurt Hollabaugh in the finale. But I think that Hubbard just like Holobaugh, have both shown great accounts of themselves in the octagon, and I think they've proven that they're here. They should be here to stay with this current talent. Now, I don't know that they'll be able to make a title run, but I feel like they are both very entertaining, and they go out there to scrap. So it definitely always an entertaining fight if you get either one of them in there. And Medeiros, like I said, this fight, I don't think this was a great showing for him. But he did get the W, so hopefully he's able to, go back to the drawing board and learn from some of the mistakes potentially that Hubbard was able to kind of exploit in terms of his striking and just overall game. So hopefully he can make some changes there and get a good win in his next one. Next fight on the card, fight number 2, Emmers versus Miranda. This actually was so I picked Miranda to win this, which I am now kind of shaking my head at. However, I was very happy to see that in like the first 15 to 30 seconds of the fight, Miranda was able to get Emmers down to the ground, and I thought that is what would happen. Miranda would get Emmers down and would be able to impose his will from a grappling perspective on the ground. He tried his best. Emmers was scrappy and found a way back to his feet, and when they were on the feet, it was as though Miranda should not even be in there with Emmers. Emmers was landing at will, several combinations, and just every punch I feel like was landing on the target. Miranda tried his best to hang in there and showed off. I will say, showed off some great durability in the shots he was able to absorb prior to being KO'd. I think that he took a lot of damage that most fighters probably wouldn't be able to withstand, but that's not necessarily the best in terms of quality. He ultimately ends up getting caught and dropped by Emmers devastatingly, and Emmers finishes and closes the show out. So great win for Emmers. I know a lot of creators picked Emmers, and unfortunately I didn't. So started off this night pretty poorly in my picks. But yeah, overall, I had some more notes there. Emmers landed some very strong leg stomps, which I love to see. And he ends up delivering a right hand from hell, dropping Miranda, and then he's able to give him some extra on the ground, some dessert, if you will. He fed him the appetizer with the leg stomp. The main course was the right hand. The dessert was the ground and pound, and that's it. Get the check. Next fight number 3. We got Hoffa versus Pichel. So in this fight, I chose Pichel, and this is mainly because I feel like Hoffa Garcia, he's been in these fights where I don't know. I was kind of sus in picking him just due to the fact that he's lost a couple fights, especially like the fight that he lost to Grant Dawson. Now, that's not necessarily a horrible loss. Grant Dawson has a very strong ground game, which he was able to utilize and then get the ground and pound off. But going into this fight, the things that I worried about with Pichel was mainly just his age. He's 42 years old. And as you guys, if you've watched these previous videos, the last 3 weeks, or not last 3 weeks, the last couple fight cards, we've had a 42-year-old fighter. So like we had Jan Blachowicz, and now we've got Vince Pichel. And I always look back to Stipe, right? As he was 42, and try to use that as my guide in terms of, hey, can I trust this fighter at that age to get it done? In this case, I felt like Pichel could. Pichel has shown he's had great showings, in his last few fights. Even if he's lost, he's always in there to scrap. He's always landing good shots, and he's definitely surprised me with his ability to still move around the cage, switch stances at will, and land shots effectively. And ultimately in this fight, taking a look at round by round, I personally had Pichel. I think that you could have Pichel winning the fight potentially, and where I'm headed with this is, yes, if you watch the fight, Hoffa was landing the more thudding or heavier sounding shots on Pichel. No doubt, right? Like, I think in round 1, Hoffa was landing that overhand. He landed a couple really good combos against the cage, some body shots to an overhand right, and landing heavy, right, on Pichel. The issue I have with it is that although they sounded like heavier shots, if you look at the damage being done to each fighter, Pichel like almost looked like in the face at least that he wasn't even getting affected by these shots. Like he was getting you would hear it land right? But Pichel would walk away. He didn't get wobbled really at all, and no real like wear on the face in terms of damage. Now, this is where I was going when I said this earlier in the video. I feel like if you're scoring for damage, right? Pichel was landing his jab at will. He had a solid 1-2 throughout. He had some really solid leg kicks too off of on Hoffa that seemed to hurt Hoffa's legs. But also he was landing that jab all fight. And I know there was an eye poke at one point as well. But the other thing that Pichel was landing that I really like to see was he had a very strong teep kick up the middle. Now, this was mixed in obviously with Hoffa kind of, continuing to move forward and landing those combinations, and they were really powerful combinations too. I think the one thing that in the judges' eyes you have to give Hoffa is Hoffa was advancing the entire fight, whereas Pichel was either, moving side to side or getting up back against the cage. And I think that is an optic, right, that is going to go in the favor of the other fighter. Now, when we talk damage, Pichel was piecing up Hoffa, and at the end of the fight, I think that Hoffa had way more damage on him than Pichel had. So yeah, I don't know how you score it, but ultimately, I think kind of seeing the back and forth between these two. This is another fight that was a pretty close fight, I would say. I think a lot of people had it scored for Hoffa. I feel like we have to decide as a fan base and from a judging perspective, is damage the sound of the shots, or is damage the visible aspects that we can actually break down tangibly? Hey, homie's got a broken nose. Homie's got a bleeding nose. This guy doesn't, right? And I know it sucks when you look at it that way, because some fighters might genetically just have this ability to not wear damage, whereas other fighters, like the Diaz brothers, for instance, they would be hit with shots and open right away, but it was scar tissue, right? So it's not necessarily that it was this damaging shot. It's just they're more susceptible to cuts due to the scar tissue. So it's kind of hard to say. Overall, this was a great scrap. I love to watch. I think both of them were going for it. And I have to say, Pichel continues to make great showings even at his age. I think he's a great fighter. And I hope that he can stay in the UFC and get some more in, because he's being competitive with guys that are, in their prime. And that's great to see. Fight number 4. We got Lupi Godinez versus Julia Palestri. This fight was an absolute banger. I love to see the scrappiness between these two women, especially as the rounds closed out, but also got into the later part. So round 3, for instance, these two were just scrapping back and forth. Lupi Godinez definitely was pushed to the brink. What I would say. I think she was getting a bit exhausted at the end of the round. In round 3, and Palestri was going for it. And Palestri was just walking her down with absolutely no respect for what was being thrown her way. And that's where I like to see Godinez kind of get scrappy and show that Mexican spirit. You could tell she was exhausted and, trying to find a way to not get hit by those heavy shots Palestri was throwing. Eating a lot of the shots just to throw her own, which you got to respect. And I also like to see Godinez start to mix in the elbows. At one point, she threw a Yair Rodriguez at her. And I think that was a smart choice, because as Palestri was advancing in round 3, Lupi Godinez was trying her best to throw her solid 1-2s and, the standard boxing combinations. And Palestri was just eating it all. She's like, come on, what else you got? I got the appetizer. I got the main course. Give me everything. And I think mixing in those elbows actually started to slow Palestri down a bit. As you saw the fight, Palestri kind of stepped back when she got connected with the elbow. So I like to see Lupi Godinez employ that. But I also would like to call out that in that fight, Lupi was really controlling most of round 1 and round 2. So she had the 2 rounds in the bag. And round 3 was more of if you're not going to finish the fight, you're on your bike, stay on the outside, just do what you have to do to get the win, which I am not always a big fan of. But I think Lupi Godinez went out there and made a great showing of herself. And then also Palestri made a great showing of herself, because in that round 3, I mean, this sold the fight for everybody in the crowd. I think this really amped up the crowd. These two were throwing bombs at each other, trying to end the fight. Palestri definitely, made, I think, even though in this loss, and this is where I think that UFC is great, right? UFC, MMA, you can go out there and lose a fight, but if you make a great showing of yourself, did you really lose? Yes, you do lose record wise, but when you make a great showing like that and you put it all out there, I feel like the fans, you can win the heart over of the fans and, earn respect that way. But also, I think from a matchmaking perspective, it's also a great sign for the matchmakers because they can look at you to say, hey, look, you're going to go out here and put on a show for the fans. And sometimes in the UFC, we've been seeing that historically being rewarded more so than a fighter who's got a boring style but doesn't lose. So I don't think in this fight you really have a true loser because although Godinez got the win, which is a great win for Mexico, and ultimately she'll be able to go on, right, and continue moving up the rankings. But Palestri's right there because she made a great showing of herself, had a very competitive fight with a strong competitor in Lupi Godinez. And if you watched my prediction video, Lupi Godinez has had some of the highest activity out of any female fighter in the UFC. So Palestri going out there and being able to scrap with her, given Godinez wealth of experience, that's a great deal for her. And so I'll be excited to see where both of these fighters end up in their next matchups. So before I jump onto the next fight, I just want to do a quick recap on Mexico wins so far. So on the card, you've got Rafa Garcia and Lupi Godinez. So it's 2-0 with the Mexican fighters at that point. So overall, great. But we'll move on to the next fight. Fight number 5. Christian Rodriguez versus Melekiziel Costa. This fight ended up being a really fun scrap as well. Lots of back and forth on the feet, but also very high level grappling and scrambles, which was fun to watch. I'm not always a huge fan of grappling, but that's not necessarily the case. I'm not a fan of the grappling of, hey, I'm going to lay on top of you and just win by holding you in position. This fight, what I like to see is these two were having these high-level scrambles and reversals of each other's techniques and getting each other in submissions and kind of reversing or getting their way, finding their way out of the submissions. So it was really fun to watch from that perspective. Going through round by round, my round 1 notes, I had C-Rod. He had started strong with his advancing and ultimately gets Costa against the cage. Both of them are on the cage and they're constantly, gaining control, reversing position. So they had a little bit of a back and forth there in round 1 on the cage. I think it was close. It was around like the 1.5 minute mark of round 1. C-Rod landed a really solid takedown on Costa. And I think he threw up, it looked like a Darce choke, but it could have been like a modified triangle or arm triangle, but ultimately Costa's able to defend it, and he ends up reversing position and landing in side control. And then once he got into side control on C-Rod in round 1, he was landing some nasty elbows, ultimately ending the round there. So I feel like because it was a very close round, you had a lot of back and forth where they were on the cage, but no fighter was truly owning the cage in terms of their control. It was a lot of back and forth. Costa was reversing position and getting control himself. C-Rod did get the takedown, so you give him credit there, but ends up being reversed. And like I said, I do think that judging is a very optical approach. I see things a certain way, right? And I also, if you guys understand critical thinking, you understand how our memory works as humans. What if you ever taken a psychology course? I think it's psychology. You learn that in movies, generally speaking, we remember the beginning and the end, and that the middle portions of a film are very not hard to remember per se, but those are not the lasting impressions that we walk away with from a memory perspective. So this goes hand in hand with fighting, especially UFC. You can have fighters winning the majority of a round, especially like the middle parts of a round, which I think that C-Rod was winning the middle portion. However, Costa ends the round inside control, landing some nasty elbows. that wins him the round, in my opinion. And it's mainly because it's what you have to think about what the judge is probably walking away with as the lasting impression before they go on the paper and they write, 10-9, whatever. That's what they saw last. So I think that is why Costa gets round one. Round two, start of the round, C-Rod landed a heavy elbow against the fence. And then Costa quickly takes control and is able to get C-Rod down and land some heavy elbows on the ground again. And ultimately, he's able to control C-Rod. He ends up getting a sub. He ends up getting C-Rod in a submission position and, holding him there for quite some time. C-Rod's able to reverse out of it at the tail end of round two, but he's not able to capitalize with any ground and pound or anything of note at the end of round two, similar to what Costa was able to do at the end of round one. Ultimately, I think you have to give round two to Costa again. I think he just was more dominant in that round than C-Rod. Round three, off the rip, C-Rod takes control, landing a pretty solid takedown. The two of them scramble back to their feet. C-Rod lands a heavy elbow that makes Costa kind of freeze a bit. And really round three, I think C-Rod imposed his will. He was backing Costa up against the cage the entire time, landing several very solid strikes, against the cage. Almost looked like C-Rod could potentially close it out because Costa was getting hit with almost everything C-Rod threw. But the rest of the fight was really just like it was C-Rod landing those solid shots, Costa doing his best to kind of evade punches as they're coming in. And ultimately, he gets a solid takedown with some heavy ground and pound, C-Rod. But I think that it just wasn't enough at the end of this fight to get C-Rod the nod. Obviously, as we know, Costa ends up getting a unanimous decision win, and I have to agree with it because I think if you look at round one and two, they're close, but I have to give those rounds to Costa just based off of how he was able to impose his will at the end of each round and just stay in control within round one and two. Fight number 6, we have Gaudier versus Medina. So this fight, this is a great fight to close out the preliminary bouts of the card. We've got, so guys, the only notes I really have, Gaudier looks strong and powerful with very fast, crispy striking. Medina made a decent showing at first. He was showing off his Mexican dad bod, and he was representing for all of the dad bods out there. So represent Medina. I appreciate that. Ultimately, he's connected. He gets landed on with a couple heavy shots, dropping him. He gets back up. He's showing off a smile, and he's telling Gaudier, like, come on, bring it. Gives him that little creepy smile. Ultimately, Gaudier says, fuck that. Throws it was like a 3 to 4 punch combo against the cage with a knee up the middle that drops Medina badly, and the referee calls it off. Gaudier looked great in this fight. Very, very strong, powerful fighter, and very exciting to kind of see where he goes next. And unfortunately for Medina, he's the first Mexican fighter to drop the ball on the card. And I do want to make one comment here. I think I saw a tweet from the one and only Money Moicano, and he said, brother, Medina is the underdog of the card. Trust me. I hope people didn't listen to that because unfortunately it didn't end up that way. Okay, we got fight number 7, Ronaldo Rodriguez versus Kevin Borjas. This fight was a great fight. I think Kevin Borjas went out there and he proved, I'm here to stay. He made a statement win by not only going into enemy territory in Mexico with Ronaldo Rodriguez has become a very popular personality in the UFC and has a ton of fans in Mexico. He had the grill mouthpiece. So I think a lot of people thought Rodriguez was going to win, myself included. And honestly, I look back on it and I think it was a mistake. I should have pieced together that Borjas has that high, like the one thing Borjas has always had is technical striking. And Rodriguez, although he has a chin, he gets hurt in his fights. He got dropped badly by Ode Osborne. Like in their fight, although Rodriguez was able to recover and take over the fight, he got dropped horribly in that fight. Like it could have been stopped. I should have pieced that together, but basically going into the fight and some of the notes I had, Rodriguez controls the initial part of round one. He's advancing. He's throwing some flashy kicks. Borjas is just continuing to have his lateral footwork moving side to side and kind of circling out of danger. And then suddenly Borjas drops Rodriguez with a solid 1-2. Like he drops him and he takes over this round. One thing I want to call out, and this is where I get a bit annoyed with commentating and judging, and I want to say this. I have the utmost respect for the commentators. I love DC. I love all of them, really, honestly. Like they all have their moments where they're saying dumb stuff, but at the end of the day, it's a hard job, and I think that there is bias. So DC is a grappler and he has a grappling bias. He's admitted to it. He made a comment that Rodriguez landed a late takedown at the end of the round, and he said this could win him the round. And I'm like, dude, he got dropped. But here's the thing, though. If we look back at the last fight card, Gunnar Nelson landed a takedown on Kevin Holland in round one. Gunnar Nelson also got dropped badly in round one. And you have a lot of fans online saying Gunnar Nelson won round one. So, like, this is not just a commentating thing. There are fans out there who somehow hold a takedown higher than a knockdown. But Rodriguez gets dropped badly in round one. And round two, I mean, that 1-2, especially the straight from Borjas, was money. It was landing at will. He was landing on the chin of Rodriguez the entire fight. And Rodriguez showed very solid durability. Though he was dropped in round one, he was able to kind of eat those punches for the remainder of the fight. But ultimately, he got a bit gun shy, I would say, after being connected on like that. And ultimately has very poor defense in his striking. Like he has his hands down and his chin is getting clipped the entire time. Round two, Rodriguez, he kind of went on and threw some more of those flashy kicks. He did land a couple things, but they were, landed not, they were glancing, if you will. And also, Borjas had very good defense when that spinning kick was landed on the head. Rodriguez pushes for a takedown at the end of round two, no success. And then round three, Borjas comes out. Round three starts, Borjas comes out with a very solid combination, a couple punches to the body and head, a very solid body shot that he lands. Rodriguez actually, picked it up a bit in round three himself, landing some solid shots in like the first minute of round three, ultimately. And then with about 1 minute and 2 seconds, I believe it was left in round three. In round three, the striking was back and forth. For both fighters, I would say this round was probably the most competitive striking wise. But Borjas does land a very solid right hook on the chin of Rodriguez, which kind of stumbles him back, but it doesn't necessarily hurt him, but definitely pauses him for a second. And I would say overall, Borjas, I think he took it in every round. I cannot see giving Rodriguez any of the rounds. I think it was a masterclass performance for Borjas, and I think he was not only an underdog, but very underestimated by myself and several other creators who picked Rodriguez to get the win. Unfortunately for Rodriguez, joining Medina with another loss on the Mexican fighter side. I believe at this point of the card, it's 3-2 for the Mexican fighters. So that's very good news for them because I believe at the end of the day, they actually went positive in terms of their win-to-loss ratio on this fight card. Okay, guys, I think that was fight number 7. I just have to keep going back here to check. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Our next fight on the card. The Mexican fighters definitely went positive here. Fight number 8. We've got Martinez versus Oliveira. This fight, similar to the Gautier fight, ends in round 1. Martinez sparks out Oliveira pretty badly. He's, off the rip, Martinez is throwing some very fast and very intentional shots. He's mixing up the attacks beautifully as well. throwing some stuff to the head, throws a head kick that gets blocked, throws a very solid leg kick. He's mixing up these attacks, throwing some body stuff as well. I think making Oliveira guess where he's going next. He's able to land some heavy leg kicks, and then that really allows him to bring that kick back up top. Ultimately, he lands on Oliveira, dropping him and dropping him badly. He ends up getting the ground and pound and finish, and that's all she wrote. Martinez gets the W. Great win for him, and I think a lot of folks actually picked him as well, knowing his striking acumen, knowing that it's in his hometown. He went out there and showed out, bringing the Mexican fighters 4-2 on the card. Fight number 9. Raul Rosas Jr., Mr. Crimson Chin himself, versus Vince Morales. This was a good fight. This was a very good fight. Very high-level grappling exchanges happening in this fight. Some notes that I had off the bat, Rosas is looking strong on the feet. Definitely one thing to call out for Rosas is just knowing he's still very young at 20 years old. I have personally seen him grow so much in his striking. I mean, if you go back and watch his fight with C-Rod compared to this fight with Morales, he has stepped up and leveled up his game so much, not only in the striking, but just in the ground, in the grappling exchanges, finding ways to impose his will on the ground. In the start of the fight, he got a very strong push kick on Morales, kind of getting him to back up. And then he's also able to find a very strong takedown where he drops this fool. Like, he picked him up, walked him to the center of the octagon, and dropped him. So that was very solid, and I think that easily wins him round 1. Now, with that, Morales was very scrappy on the ground himself. When getting put down, he was able to find several different reversals and get the controlling positions, and also throw up his own submissions on Raul Rosas Jr., with no success overall in terms of getting him to tap, but he's able to throw that threat in there, which I think made things a bit difficult for Rosas as he continued to, try to bring things and go to the ground. Round 2, they start off quick. They're both landing their jabs pretty easily and strong. I will say, from a power perspective, Rosas seemed to have more power behind his shots than Morales. Around the 3-minute 50 mark, Rosas is throwing several different punches and trying to string together some combinations. Morales did a great job with head movement. He's bobbing and weaving out and slipping each of those shots, ultimately making it difficult to be hit by Rosas. Rosas is able to get the takedown about 20 seconds later at the 3-minute 30 mark. Gets Morales down to one knee. What I would have liked to see when Morales is on that one knee is Rosas throw that knee up the middle and connect on the face. I don't know, though. I am not sure. I know that Vegas follows these rules now with the downed opponent. I don't know if Mexico does, but I did see a couple moments for the other fights as well where a fighter had their hands down and not another limb as it's supposed to be. And so I would have liked to see some knees to the head on those. Like I said, I don't know for certain if that is a rule that Mexico follows. At the end of round 2, Rosas is able to, get the back of Morales, but with no success in terms of, actually getting the submission off. So that round ends. So at this point, I got to give it round 1 and 2 to Rosas. Round 3 is a very competitive round, and actually almost seemed like Rosas might be down for the count in the round. Morales cinches up a choke almost immediately in the round. And he almost gets Rosas out of there. Rosas is able to get out of the position, and he lands some strong and heavy shots in side control. But then what ends up happening, Morales is able to scramble out of that position and also get another submission up on Rosas. And ultimately, the fight ends with Morales getting Rosas in what appears to be a pretty deep submission. But Rosas is able to survive it and get the W. So he ends up bringing Mexico to 5-2. This is a great fight, though. I think that people who might be hating on Rosas are missing the aspects of, not only is he still super young, he's very strong at a young age, which is something that not every fighter has, right? I think you see some fighters like Mokaev, for instance. Mokaev made a comment before he got kicked out of the UFC about how the UFC is expecting him to fight grown men while he's still like young because he's like 23 years old, which I understand fully. But Rosas does not subscribe to that. Like he's much younger, and he's going out there and making a great showing of himself against older and probably physically stronger opponents. So that's a testament to, if Rosas is doing this at age 20, what's he going to look like 5, 6 years from now? This guy has the potential to have, probably, even if he doesn't beat John Jones' record, becoming champ by the age of 23, this guy has the potential to have the most UFC fights ever, given the fact that he's this young. And if he can stay healthy and consistent with his fighting and getting in there more often, he could easily win an award for getting the most fights in the UFC because of his age. So I would like to see Rosas have a little bit more activity, get some more wins under his belt. But ultimately, he looked great in this fight, and it'll be cool to see where he goes next from here. I will say Morales definitely deserves a lot of respect, and I hope that he gets another shot in the UFC too, because this was a great showing for him. Although he did get the L against Rosas, he did put a lot of threatening submissions up there, and I think he's a very scrappy, competitive opponent for anyone on the card, but also anyone that's in that division. Fight number 10, we got Edgar Chairez versus CJ Vergara. So in this fight, ended very quickly. Here's my main note for Edgar Chairez. Edgar Chairez looked like the flyweight Pereira. He literally goes out there. He's got the shaved head. He's got the game face on. The fight starts, and the two Vergara and Chairez are kind of both, moving around the cage, trying to find their shots. Chairez lands a whipping left hook. This is where I feel like he looks like the flyweight Poatan. Lands a whipping left hook right on the chin, and it literally shakes Vergara's entire world up. Like you could see his legs falling out from below him. He's trying to stay standing, trying to, get his wits about him, shake off the cobwebs. He's kind of lateral movement, covering the face. And Chairez just, is like, he's a bloodthirsty individual. He sees the blood in the water, and he's like a shark going at him, just advancing slowly, but looking for the kill shot. Vergara is able to kind of escape by, that lateral movement. Chairez ends up landing a straight, and then he throws another whipping left hook. It's like the left hook in this fight was the money, because any time it landed, I think it landed like 2 or 3 times. Every time that punch landed on Vergara, you saw him be just shaken to his core. So Chairez drops him badly and jumps on the back. And it was a rear naked choke setup, but I would say it was more of a face crank, because it wasn't even under the chin, I don't think. And he just cranks it back and definitely got the leverage that he needed, and ultimately gets Vergara to tap his own stomach. And there it is. End of the fight. Great fight for Chairez, and it'll be great to see where he goes next. He had a very emotional post-fight speech, which is really cool to see, and got that bump from the crowd. And I think that brings Mexico to actually 5-2 on the card, or 6-2 on the card. Ultimately, Mexico blew it out of the water this time with their talent and their fighters. Fight number 11, Manuel Torres versus Drew Dober. This fight, as you guys, if you saw my prediction video, I thought that Drew Dober would get the win here, given that Drew Dober has had such a strong chin in his fights, very powerful, and an ability to absorb damage to give his own. I thought that would be the story here. I love Manuel Torres, very strong fighter, very good striking, and very powerful striking. And one thing Laura Senko made a comment on that I totally agree with is Manuel Torres throws every shot like he's trying to end your life. Like he wants to fucking put you out cold. And that's exactly how he was throwing with Dober. Off the bat, he lands a couple shots. Dober seems to be eating it well. Dober was very hesitant. I think it was very difficult for Dober to find his striking on the feet. He did get a couple solid leg kicks off, but nothing of note from a punch perspective. Ultimately, Torres is able to just throw that 1-2 again, land that solid right straight down the pike. drops Dober. Okay. Dober getting dropped is shocking. Like, to see Dober get dropped is shocking. Like, if you go watch this dude's fights, he's been hit by the best of the best. And I think Frivola was the only other person to actually drop him. Gene Silva landed hella shots on him. I don't even know that he may have dropped Dober once, but not this badly. So he drops Dober, and Torres just lands vicious ground and pound. And it's not really even ground and pound, just hammer fist. And then he's literally throwing straights to the side of the head and landing solid hammer fist to the side of the head for much too long. And Dober was still there. But actually, guys, I feel like this fight, and I hope this is not the case, because I love watching Drew Dober fight. I want to see him come back, and I hope he can be in the UFC as long as he wants to be. Even with the losses, the guy is a exciting fighter. He always goes out there to bang, and also just a humble dude. Like, there's nothing I don't know how you could not like Drew Dober. I do think that Manuel Torres may have officially eviscerated the Giga Chad chin that Dober has. It was a scary KO. Although Dober wasn't out cold, he got back up, and he literally, with the referee telling him like it's over, Dober got in fighting stance and continues to walk towards Torres as if the fight's still happening, as if there was like a brief pause and he's like in the fight again. That was very scary to see, because clearly, although he's not out cold, he's not all there. And the fact that he stands back up and he gets in stance and he's like literally trying to continue this fight, it's a very scary KO from that perspective. I hope that Dober's able to recover and get his wits about him, and I just hope he takes a little bit of time off and he's able to get back in there, maybe in 6 months or longer. I don't want to see him come back too soon, because I think that was a pretty devastating KO. Shout out to Manuel Torres, though. What a strike, and what a strong ability to get the finish there on a very crafty, dangerous vet like Drew Dober. So just real quick, I got to do a test here to see how many the Mexican fighters have, right? So we've got 1, 2. So if you're counting Christian Rodriguez in the Mexican fighter, I know Christian Rodriguez is from United States of America, but prelims, we'll call it 2 and 2, right? Because Medina lost, Rodriguez lost, Godinez won, Hoffa won. So 2 and 2 on the prelims. 2 and 3 with the loss of Rodriguez, 3 and 3 with the win of Martinez, 4 and 3 with Raul Rosas, 5 and 3 with Chairez, 6 and 3 with Torres, and finally, fight number 12, we got Brandon Moreno versus Steve Erceg. This was a masterclass performance from, I would say, both fighters. I saw quite a bit of disdain or shitty comments towards Steve Erceg, which I'm not going to agree with. I think that although Steve Erceg lost this fight, this is one of those fights where I don't think there's a loser, because Steve Erceg made a great showing of himself going in there against a veteran like Brandon Moreno and being able to still land and be technical on the feet. Ultimately, I think he won like at least 1 or 2 of the rounds. But Brandon Moreno, I mean, I got to just try this. His ability to like keep the chin down, like, this hurts my fucking neck to do this. His ability to keep his head in that position and be so evasive on the strikes, great head movement throughout the fight. And then ultimately, his ability to kind of be in that position, but then, throw his shots was very, very fun to watch. Brandon Moreno is one of the best fighters the UFC's ever had. Knowing his story, how he was, he didn't win in the Ultimate Fighter. He ultimately ends up getting into the UFC and then losing in the UFC and having to find his way back to the UFC, getting back to the UFC and becoming a 2-time champion. It's been so, I feel blessed to be able to watch Brandon Moreno do all that he's achieved in the UFC in the last 5 years. Like, it has been absolutely amazing to see. And he really did have a masterclass performance. I think that there's still areas where, he can get caught, but he's got that Mexican spirit. It's like with the fighters that have the Mexican spirit, it's almost like getting tagged is part of it, right? Like I gotta get hit to go and give one, and you have to respect that. And ultimately, this fight was a fantastic fight from start to finish. Very competitive. Both fighters very quick on the feet and very technical on the feet. And it was fun to watch. Even though Steve Erceg got the L, I feel like he doesn't walk away with an L in this fight, given that it's Brandon Moreno he's fighting, one of the best in the world. Given his showing he had against Pantoja as well, it's like Erceg, it's only up for Erceg. He's still so young, and he can continue to make adjustments and improve his game. I think that he could potentially, be another, a title challenger again in the near future. But Moreno absolutely put a stamp on this one, showed that he is a crafty vet, able to string together, beautiful combinations on the feet. His body kick is just nasty. Like when he landed that bitch, and then also I love to see his like little stutter step, and then he sprints into a leg kick, like landing a thudding leg kick that like it's like if you play UFC 5 and you land a hard leg kick and sometimes the fighter like turns their leg over. That's exactly how Moreno was landing those kicks. So a lot of fun stuff to see in both their games. And ultimately, I'm just so happy for Brandon Moreno, seeing him, come back against adversity and things that he's been able to achieve in his career. Ultimately, very great fight card, a very enjoyable fight card. I hope that you guys enjoyed it as well. Make sure you like this video and subscribe for more MMA content. Thanks for watching.